All right, guys, welcome. I'm glad that you're here. If you're someone who is seeking uncommon results, this podcast is for you. Success, happiness, and wisdom. What do these words mean to you? I think we can all agree that we'll probably all have slightly different definitions of each. In these podcasts, I get to dive deeply into conversations with some amazing innovators, influencers, and trendsetters that have had different versions of how they define the terms, yet have come out on the other side with amazing, uncommon results. At some point in their lives, they have decided to unshackle themselves from the norm and go beyond all boundaries. All right, everybody. Well, welcome back to Beyond All Boundaries. And I'm really excited to have a good friend of mine, Kevin Fink, join the podcast today. Kevin and I go way back, probably, maybe it's been 10 years now, Kevin.
I'm sure.
We met in the financial space, and Kevin was a trainer, a leader in the industry. And over our friendship and in the study groups that we were in and the things that we were involved in, Kevin was always one to really focus on personal growth and development. And a number of years ago, Kevin really encouraged me, and I got to thank you for doing that, Kevin, because you didn't back off, right? And you wouldn't let me make up excuses. But anyways, Kevin really challenged me to go into a course that really stretched development and growth and challenges, and how do we interact and how do we make ourselves better and really play full out of what we're doing, not only in business but in life. And Kevin had a huge impact on me in my life, and I just wanted to bring Kevin on because he just shares a vast amount of knowledge in that space, and so I'm really looking forward to the podcast, and again, have my good friend back on. So Kevin, welcome, and why don't you just do a little introduction of yourself, and we'll just take it off.
Sure. Thanks, John. First of all, I just want to say thank you for having me on. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to your audience. And you and I do go way back. And like you said, it's been at least 10 years. And we've got a special friendship. And I appreciate your trust that you've put in me over the years, and the kindness and generosity that you've shared with me. So you're more than a friend. You're my brother, and I love you.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about, as it relates to this podcast and the things that we're trying to really help people understand is just the journey and the challenges, and just how can we change and frame our mindset to how we show up every day. And not only in our business life, but even more in our personal, right? And it should kind of flow through. But what things can we share, do you want to share with the audience of just your journey, Kevin, too, and just the things that you've explored and understand that maybe would have some really big impact today for some of our viewers?
Sure. I could go a couple different ways with that, John, and I'll share my personal journey. It's a bit of a tale, but I'll share it with you and the audience here in a minute. But one of the things, the main concept that has come out of all of the things that I've done, my biggest learning has been to look at why don't, so you talk about mindset. So why don't we as humans ultimately get to our outcomes on a consistent basis, right? So personal growth and development and mindset really is about changing our programming, changing the stories that we have and the stories that we tell ourselves, right? And what I've learned in this whole process is it's one thing to have an outcome or a goal that I'm focused on. And a lot of people have seen the studies, that those people who have goals have a much higher percentage of getting there than the people that just, or the people that write down their goals, right, have a much higher percentage of achieving them than the people who just wish that they had certain things. And yet I still look at a lot of people that write down their goals, and even for myself, I would write down my goals, but I failed a lot at reaching them. And what I came to understand is that in order to make change more lasting, to create lasting change, that there's a step in the process. It's actually a 3-step process. And there's a step in the process, the first step, the most important step, that we've never been told about. We've never talked about it, and yet it's the most critical one. And that is letting go of old stories, letting go of the hurts of the past, releasing emotional baggage, however you want to state it. It's putting our shit behind us. Can I say shit on your show?
This is all about being real, Kevin. So yeah.
All right, cool. So, you know, it really is about putting our BS, right, behind us and changing those limiting beliefs that we have about ourselves. Because if we don't do that first part, if we don't learn how to let go of those old stories that are no longer benefiting us, they continue to cloud our present and they make our future much more predictable. And it's usually not the kind of future that we're looking for. So that's the first step, releasing emotional baggage. The second step is setting powerful outcomes. So setting those goals. But the analogy I like to use, John, is your life is like a painting. So all the experiences that you've had in life color your view of the world. So it's like you've got this canvas that your experiences and the things that you've been taught and the experiences you've had, it paints your picture of your life. And in that picture, there's some old stuff that maybe you're not proud of, or maybe things that have happened to you that have been hurtful that are in that picture. So when you want to create something new for yourself, a new outcome, most people, what they do is they just attempt to paint over the picture that's already there. And as you can imagine, anytime you go to paint over something, it requires a lot of effort and a lot of brush strokes. And if the stuff behind it is dark enough, it's going to bleed through. So the first step of letting go of the emotional baggage, what it in essence does is it puts a coat of kills over the picture, or it just literally allows you to start with a new canvas to then paint the picture that you want. So step one is letting go of the emotional baggage. Step two is setting powerful outcomes. And as a subset of set number two is while focusing on what you want. So it's important that we're focused on what we want instead of running away from what we don't want. And I'll give you an example. A lot of people say, you know, in the space of health and wellness or health and fitness, people will say, I don't want to be overweight. I don't want to be fat anymore. Right? And so what they're focused on is not being fat. It's what they don't want. But when we focus on something, that's what expands for us. And the way the brain works is it doesn't acknowledge the negative, right? Because there are over 2 million bits of information that are flowing at us at any given moment in time. And our brain can only consciously handle 126 of those 2 million bits. So everything else that we've told the brain, we're not interested in this stuff. We just want you to find these 126. What it does is it deletes, generalizes, or distorts everything else. And the part of our brain that does that is called our reticular activating system, or the RAS. And the RAS doesn't recognize negatives. So an example of that would be to say, John, right now, whatever you do, don't think about pink elephants. Do not think about pink elephants, and don't think about me with a big elephant trunk on my nose. Don't think about that either, right? And so as soon as I say that, what are you thinking about?
Pink elephants.
Big elephants and me with a big trunk, right? So that's because the reticular activating system doesn't pick up on the negative. So when I say I don't want to be fat, the reticular activating system says, oh, do the things that'll make you fat. So instead of saying I don't want to be fat, change it to focus on what I do want. I want to be healthy, right? If I'm healthy, a byproduct of that is I'll lose weight. And as a result, I won't be fat anymore, but I'm focused on what I want instead of what I don't want. That's really important.
I mean, that's just really, you know, if you think about it, it's kind of a play on words in such a way too, to where, you know, it's interesting that our brain will not pick up the negatives. And, you know, you talked a couple times, Kevin, about the outcome. Right. And I think for me, in the conversations that we've had and the dialogue that we've had in certain situations, you know, one thing that you'll always do is you'll pull me back and say, John, what is your outcome? Right. What is the way you respond? Is that going to get to what your outcome is?
Yep.
And I think, you know, it's, you know, when we talk about having outcomes and we talk about the things that we want to do in big picture, right, and goals and things like that is normal. But even on a day-to-day conversation with your spouse, with your kids, with your business partners or staff, right? It's almost to the point of, okay, this needs to be addressed, but what is my outcome, or what's the purpose and outcome of this conversation? That's the way that I need to really go into this conversation, whether if you're, frustrated, pissed off, or whatever it is, by having that dialogue, what's the outcome going to be? And you really have to come back and think about it. And, you've always challenged me with that, right? Because I'm more of a reactionary person, right? And I wear my emotions on my sleeve and things like that. And, sometimes that's good and sometimes it's not so good, because, I might go into a conversation and the result was not what I intended at all. It was not my outcome, but it was the way that my demeanor, the communication, the way that I addressed the problem was not the outcome. And so I think even from, it just that word outcome, and just on a micro scale, I think is critical. And, just the things that you've talked about too, is just how our brain doesn't pick up negativity, and, the things that we can kind of retrain our brain. And, the things that you and I have talked about too in the past is that words have power. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that? I mean, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but do you want to kind of dig into that a little bit and just kind of what that means maybe more for our listeners, and just from your perspective as a coach and leadership development?
Let me, and I will do that. But let me come back to the whole outcome thing, because it really is ultimately that's the one thing that if people would just start doing, asking themselves, what's my outcome? What's the outcome? WTO, what's the outcome? So many times in personal relationships or business relationships, we find ourselves having some WTF moments, right? And everybody knows what that means, right? It doesn't mean, well, that's fantastic. You know what it means. And when you find yourself having a lot of WTF moments, what I would encourage you is let that be an anchor for you to stop and say, wait a minute, WTO. What's the outcome? What is my outcome here? Because as soon as I refocus on my outcome, exactly what you said, I know what I need to do in order to move forward towards that outcome. So being more outcome focused is game changer for people, right? And I also want to just clarify a little bit something you said, because there's a big difference between our brain not seeing negative and our reticular activating system not letting the negative through. Because we see negative everywhere, right? And a lot of times people ask me the question, you're so positive. How can you be so positive all the time? Because all I see around me are negative things. And there's actually a physiological reason that it's easier for us to see negative than it is to find positive. And it goes all the way back to our prehistoric crocodile brain, right? The most ancient part of our brains. Its only purpose is to preserve our life. And the way it preserves our life is it determines at every given moment, should we fight, should we run, or should we freeze, right? Fight, flight, or freeze. That's the only things that part of our brain does. And so if you go all the way back to, early caveman, if he came out of his cave in the morning just whistling a tune, all happy, and the sun is shining and the grass is green and I'm having a great day and the birds are chirping, and all he's focused on is the positive stuff, his brain's probably not picking up the rustling over in the bush that might be the thing that's going to eat him. And so that's the part of our unconscious mind that's always looking for, what are the things that can hurt me? And that's why it focuses primarily on negative. But every time that negative shows up, because you've been through the class, positive is also available, because positive and negative, while they are opposites, but they are also part of one whole being, because they're a comparison. You can't identify something as being positive unless you have something negative to compare it to. Conversely, you can't say this situation is negative unless you can think of a situation that's opposite of that. That would be positive. So one of the ways that people can choose to be more positive, and it really is a choice, is to do exactly what you said, which is to speak more powerfully, right? There are a lot of different powerless words. The Mac Daddy of all powerless words is which one?
Try,
right? Because trying, there's no power at all in trying. Trying is simply a zone of neutrality that is an excuse for not playing full out. Because if you don't play full out and you don't get what you want in your life, you can always say, well, at least I tried, right? And there is no such thing, so Yoda, the great philosopher of our time, Yoda, yeah, he said in Star Wars, do or do not, there is no try.
Right.
You
That's a pretty good impression, Kevin.
Thank you, man. I've been working on that one just for the show. But there is no trying. There is either you do or you don't. You either succeed or you fail. And so when people say, well, I'll try to be there, so if you say to me, hey, John, or hey, Kev, I want you to come by the house tonight for dinner. Dinner's at 7. I say, okay, John, I'll try to be there at 7. Do you expect me at 7? No, because again, there's no value in saying try. So instead of saying you'll try to do something, find the word that can replace it that's actually an action, right? You either did or you didn't. So I even go so far to I've basically eliminated the word try from my vocabulary. There's not one time that you can think of that try is the perfect solution. And people say, well, what about trying on some clothes? No, you're putting on clothes. You're going to put them on. They either fit or they don't. You either like them or you don't, but you didn't try them on, you put them on, right? What about I tried out for the baseball team or the hockey team? No, you auditioned, right?
Right.
You auditioned and you either made it or you didn't. So trying is powerless, right? Some other powerless words are things like, we call them victim statements. Things like saying, I have to, right? I must. Nobody's forcing you, right? Now, be careful with that, because have to, if there's a linear progression of things, like I have to do A before I do B before I do C, well, that's me saying this has to get done in a sequential order. It's not saying someone else is forcing me, right? Well, I have to go to work. No, you don't, right? You don't have to go to work. You could stay at home, but there's consequences, right? So everybody's at choice. Could, would, should. Yeah. A lot of people go around shoulding all over themselves.
Right?
You should do this. You should do that. I should do this. I should do that. No. And all of those words, for the most part, can replace with one word. You remember what it is?
I don't. Remind me.
Will. I will. I will do
well, and I was thinking too, like, what other words could we replace inside of that, right?
There's three. There's 3 words that if you use, or 3 phrases that if you use these 3 phrases, it's always going to be more powerful than any of those things. And here they are. I will, I am, or I choose.
Yep. See, I was going to say choice, right? Instead of I have to, I choose to.
Exactly right. Yeah. I have to get up in the morning. No, I choose to get up in the morning. I get to get up in the morning. Now, there's another one that's kind of a tricky one. And I would offer that it is also a powerless word. And that's the phrase, I can. Now, a lot of people believe I can is also powerful because you can do anything, right? Mama, Papa, they told you, Johnny, you can be anything you want. And that's true, you can. But I can is just a statement of potential. You have the potential. The power doesn't come from saying I can. The power comes from saying I will. So just speaking more powerfully will give people more self-confidence, right? And it brings more positivity and more power into their life. So is it all right if I kind of share my longer story? We got time for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For sure.
So when I was a kid, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Illinois in what I would call a middle to upper middle income family. My parents had their own business. It was a wholesale candy distributorship. So my dad was the candy man, and which was the beginning of my lifelong issues with my weight, I believe, because there was always candy around. And my dad, I remember very distinctly. So in our house, my bedroom, my parents had a small closet. My mom's clothes were all in her closet. So my dad's clothes were in my closet, in my room. And it was 1976. I was 7 years old. And Evel Knievel was like the daredevil, right? He was doing all of his stuff. He was jumping over the fountains. He was jumping over the Grand Canyon. He was doing all this stuff, and he was my hero. And my birthday had been about a month before, and my folks had bought me the Evel Knievel action figure and motorcycle and his motorhome. And I mean, it was just my favorite toy. I was 7 years old. And my dad came in my room to get something out of his closet, and he stepped on one of my toys that was in the way, and then he stubbed his toe on another one. And he got so angry that he reared back and he kicked the motorhome, and he destroyed it. He kicked it as hard as he could. He destroyed it, and he screamed at me about how ungrateful I was. And the message that I heard was, "You're not good enough. You're not good enough." And I remember that like it was yesterday. And then a few years go by, and I'm playing Little League. I've hit one home run over the fence in my entire baseball career. I started playing when I was 9 years old. I played till I was 18. I hit one home run over the fence, and my dad wasn't there to see it. My dad was a girls softball coach. He helped bring girls softball to the state of Illinois. He was instrumental in starting girls softball. And from 1976 until 1978, they played over 100 games, and I was at basically every one of them. I was the bat boy. So over 100 games, and we traveled all over the country to go to those games and tournaments. They actually won the national championship in 1978. So I traveled all over the country, over 100 games, and I played baseball at a field that was 5 minutes from our house. And my dad, in the 9 years I played baseball, I bet my dad saw me play maybe 2 or 3 times. And the message that I received was, "You're not important enough. You're not good enough." And fast forward to high school, and I was always a good student, right? And my dad never said the words, "You're not good enough." But as a little kid, that's the message I received, right? And I remember my last year in high school, I had been the president of my class all 4 years. I was like in the top 20 of over 450 students. I was an Illinois State scholar. I had scholarships to universities. And I remember my last report card, I had 7 A's and 1 B. I had a 4.23 GPA out of 4 overall. And instead of saying, "Hey, great job, I'm really proud of you," what I heard was, "How come you got the B? Not good enough." And I carried that forward with me for a long time. And even, into my first marriage. So I've been married 3 times. In my third marriage now, and I don't know if it's 3 strikes and you're out or third time's the charm, but I think it's third time's the charm. That's what Michelle would say, right?
Yeah.
And my parents were my role models for what relationships looked like, and their primary methodology of communication was screaming at each other, and until my mom would lock herself in the bathroom and cry. So that's so my dad, while he was never physically abusive, he was mentally and verbally abusive. And I thought, based on what I observed of them, that the way that you communicate with your significant other is you yell and scream, you call them names, you say shitty things about them until they cry, and then you make up, and that's how relationships work. Well, my first wife, she wasn't down with that methodology.
Right.
And on my 25th birthday, she told me she wanted a divorce. And that was my first wake-up call. That was my first wake-up call that my behavior was causing things that were not getting me to my outcome. And so that's really when I started my journey of personal development and saying, okay, this is not working for me. What can I do differently? How can I be a better person? What can I do for myself and invest in myself to be better? And it was about a year after that I changed careers. I got out of, so I had a computer science degree from Purdue. That took me to Houston, Texas, where I was a computer programmer for 5 years, and I got burned out. And that was right about the same time as I got divorced. And I was burned out. And I remember going to my dad and saying, "Hey, Dad, I'm thinking about changing careers. I'm thinking about getting in the life insurance business. You know, you're a self-employed person. I've seen the freedom that you have. That, you know, we've been able to take vacations and do different things, and I want to be self-employed like you." And he said, "Don't do it. Stay where you are. Keep the job, even though you're unhappy, because you won't make it in the insurance business. You're not good enough." He didn't say the words, but that's what I heard.
Right.
And honest to God, John, I think he wasn't doing it to be an asshole.
Right.
He thought he was loving me, right, by being hard on me or telling me his truth. But that's not what I heard.
Right.
And, you know, I've experienced some depression in my life. I've experienced depression recently in my life. Last September, so in 2019, I had a panic attack. I've never had a panic attack before. I was in bed. It was about 10 o'clock at night. And all of a sudden I started hyperventilating. I was crying. I didn't know why. Nothing had happened that had triggered it, as far as I know. Now, in retrospect, there was a lot of financial pressure. There was a lot of shit going on in my life that I was not handling well. And Michelle, my wife, had been begging me really for a few months to go see a doctor, get on some medication, do something. But, you know, I said, no, I can handle this. I don't like being on medication, and I'll meditate and I'll exercise and I'll do all these things and it'll be great. And the reality was I wasn't doing any of it. And I said to her, 10:15 at night, I said, I got to get out of here. I said, I just need to go for a walk or a bike ride or something, because I don't know what's happening. And I went out of the house and I got on my bike and I just started riding. I didn't know where I was going. I was just riding. I was still crying. I had all kinds of stories going on in my head, right? I was in some significant financial trouble with the IRS. And as a financial advisor, right, you're not supposed to have financial problems. You're supposed to tell other people what to do with their money, and you're not supposed to be all screwed up in your own finances. So I had all kinds of guilt, right, that I was dealing with, because here I am telling other people how to save and invest and do things. And while I wanted to do all those same things, I was so upside down and in trouble that I couldn't do anything. So the guilt and the shame and all that negative stuff, those negative stories, you know, they were just weighing on me. And after about 30 minutes of riding around town, it's almost 11 o'clock at night, I found myself downtown, the little village that we live in, by the train tracks. And I stopped my bike because I heard the train coming. And I knew from the whistle that it was about 2 stops away. And I started wondering if maybe my family wouldn't be better off without me. That, you know, the $2 million of life insurance that I had, if maybe that wouldn't just take care of all the financial problems and just make that go away. And maybe it wouldn't hurt. I wouldn't hurt and feel the pain and the depression anymore. And as the train got closer, I started wondering, I wonder if it's going to hurt. I wonder if I can do it. I wonder what people will think about me if I do it. And as the train sped past me, I knew that it wasn't the right thing to do. It wasn't the right thing to do to my family. It wasn't the right thing to do to the train conductor. It wasn't the right thing to do to my friends. It wasn't the right thing. It wasn't my time. And that was my pit moment. That was my moment when I said, this shit's got to change. I have to start being the role model. I have to start living a life of authenticity and stop being a fraud, living my life as a fraud. And the next day I called the doctor and I got an appointment and I got on some meds and and life is way better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so grateful that I had that moment, because I know what that feels like, to be that far down in a pit, to have the self-doubt, and to have the guilt and the shame and the anger and the sadness and all the negative stuff that I'm talking about when I say that's the baggage,
Mm-hmm.
that until we learn how to let go of it, it's almost impossible to move on. And I want to be clear that letting go of baggage is not about forgetting what happened, right? So we have these events in life that create our memories, and our memories have emotions attached to them. It's not about saying, oh, I'm going to forget about that, I'm going to put that away because it didn't happen. No, bullshit. It did happen,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not still happening. And
Right.
that's where disconnecting the emotion from the event allows us to move forward. And so the most important thing that I hope your listeners and viewers take away from this conversation is, you don't have to hold on to the emotions of the event. You can remember what happened, right? You always want to learn from what happened so it doesn't happen again. But forgiving the other parties, or even forgiving yourself for whatever it was, that's one way to start releasing that emotional baggage. That's the first step. And then we can start to powerfully set those outcomes, right? So since that time, 12 months ago, 13 months ago now, things have been a lot better, right? I've launched this coaching business. I've got coaching clients, and things are moving forward in a powerful way. So even if you're listening to this and you're kind of in one of those pit moments, because let's be honest, this year has been a cluster of epic proportions, right? Suicide rates are way up. Depression is way up. And people don't know how to deal with all the change and all the stuff that's happened.
Right.
And the good news is you can move forward, and there are tools and techniques to do that. And that's part of what I do in my coaching.
Well,
So,
what's interesting too, Kevin, is that, and thanks for sharing that, right? I mean, that's, and one thing that you've always talked to me about too is vulnerability is strength, right? It's not easy to share your real life story, but, one thing that I want to kind of point out is that, you were an inspiration to a lot of people. You were doing coaching, you were doing leadership training, you had all these tools, right? When you went through this in 2019.
yeah.
So the reason why I want to point that out is it's not just because you had this thing in 2019 that happened that changed your course to become a coach. Or you've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
And you had all the tools and all the knowledge and all the things at your fingertips. And so that's what I think is important too, is, the mindset, your outcomes and how you get up. I mean, you of anybody, right? We're coaching that for a number of years, and yet we can ourselves, it's always easy, I guess, what I'm trying to say, it's always easy to, sit on the other side of the desk, so to speak, right? Because you had all the tools.
Yeah.
And my point is that even if we have all the tools, doesn't mean you're good or you're perfect. You got to continue the journey. It's so easy to get off course. I know, like when I went through that course and think like, and I've talked to you about this, it's when you're not constantly involved in it, it's so easy just to go back to the way you were.
Yeah.
Right. And so I guess my point of bringing this up is for the viewers who listen, like, you had all the training, you were coaching this stuff. I mean, you were inundated, and you still had a trying time to where you were still listening to all your BS, right? Your belief system and all the crap that you were telling yourself.
Yep.
And you had a major event, and it's important to understand that, find a coach, find somebody that you can talk to and communicate to, because even you as a coach, you needed somebody on your side of the desk talking to you about it.
Yep. And you're absolutely right, John. And it's because I wasn't doing the third step consistently, right? So the first step is letting go of the emotional baggage. Second step is setting the outcome. The third step is you've got to take action. You have to do something, right? So, because it's one thing to know, but it's something completely different to do. And that's where I was falling down. Was, you're absolutely right. I was telling other people how to do it, but I wasn't doing it myself. That's why I was being a fraud. At least I should say I wasn't doing it consistently, right? Certainly I was doing it, because I fully believe you can't coach something that you don't do, right? So I was doing it, but not consistently. And you make another great point, right? Coaches need coaches.
Right.
Everybody needs coaching.
And I think it's important too to understand. I mean, Kevin, I mean, it wasn't like you were saying one thing and I, you know, I know you use the word fraud, but I mean, I know you as a person.
Yeah.
And you were genuinely, I mean, all the years that I've known you, you've always improved and challenged and you know, tried to get to your level of playing full out. So it wasn't like, and I know you use the word as a fraud, right? Because that's kind of how you felt. But for the listeners, like, I mean, it wasn't like you were saying one thing and not doing it. I mean, because I've known you for 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? We've had a lot of real conversations.
Yeah. And I appreciate that distinction, John. The reason I use the word fraud is I was in a coaching session being coached, and my coach said, "You're living life as a fraud." And that word hit me like a ton of bricks. And so I just connected to it. You're right. It's not that I wasn't walking the path. I certainly was. But those parts of me that weren't, that was the part that was being inauthentic and felt like a fraud. So, but I appreciate that, because it wasn't like I was just saying, you do this, but I'm going to go do that.
Right.
It was inconsistency, right? And inefficiency on my part.
So we just got a couple minutes left. Why don't you share with your coaching, you know, your coaching name and what you're doing in your business model, and then I want to end with just one other thing. But you know, if you want to just explain to our viewers, you know, how they can reach out to you, the things that you talk about and the things that you're doing, that'd be great.
Yeah, awesome, thanks. And before I do that, I just want to say that one of the most powerful days of my life was about 10 years ago. It's about the same time I met you. 2011. So almost exactly. Was the day that I forgave my dad. And he had been dead for 10 years. And I wrote him a letter similar to one of those letters that you probably wrote in the class that you did, right? And I was in a class, there were about 500 people in the class, and I got up in front of the 500 people and I read my letter to them that I wrote to my dad. And it was it was all about forgiveness and gratitude. And that day I let all that shit go and moved forward, and it was totally cathartic. So forgiveness is huge. So the name of my company, I call it Life Wizard Coaching. And the reason I call it that is and I call myself the chief mage or the chief life wizard, because one of my clients, I was going to work with her, and she thought that there was no hope, that she was just destined to have these problems for the rest of her life. And within a very short amount of time, I flipped her 180 degrees, and it was all, she did the work. I just guided her. And when we were done, she said, "Man, this works like magic. You're like some kind of life wizard." And so I said, "You know what? That's the name of my company now." And so it's called Life Wizard Coaching. It works like magic. And it's not magic. You do have to do the work, but it's easier than it seems. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. And my email address, the best email address for me is kevin@lifewizardcoach.com. So the company is Life Wizard Coaching. The email is kevin@lifewizardcoach.com. And and you know, one of the things I'd like to do for your audience, John, is I would love to offer them free, no obligation, no sales pitch, nothing, 1 hour of free coaching on any area of life that they want. Again, out there, no sales pitch, no ulterior motives other than to say, "Hey, I want to give you an hour. I'm so grateful for the people in my life that have given to me. that I want to do that. And so all they have to do in order to take advantage of that, and that's about a $250 value, all they have to do is shoot me an email or connect with me on Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever it is, and just say, hey, I'd love to take you up on your hour of free coaching. I'll send them a link, and I would love to do that for your listeners as a gift and a thank you to you. What you're doing brings a lot of value. I know how much value you bring to your clients and what you do, and this podcast, this thing that you're doing to help your people in your life see different perspectives is really, really cool. So thank you for the opportunity today. I always enjoy seeing you. I don't always enjoy going to Bismarck, but you probably got 14 feet of snow up there by now.
Actually, no, we don't. It's a balming 38 degrees today, Kevin.
Nice. So, yeah, we got our first snow here in Chicago last night, but it's been awesome. But again, thank you so much.
Yeah, and Kevin, that's a great give. So I appreciate that, and I hope people take you up on it, because I can just tell you that from my experience and just my relationship with Kevin, it would be well worth an hour of any topic you can talk to him about, and just the authenticity that he has and how he cares about people he'll bring value. So thank you for that give. Before we go, right, one thing I like to ask a lot of my entrepreneurs and business owners and things is, if you could do one thing over again, what would it be? And if you could do one thing consistently, what would it be?
If I could do one thing over, I would have been a different dad in the early years of my kids' lives. I started my career in 96 in the insurance business. My first son was born in 99, and my other son was born in 2001. So they were very, very young when I was really building my business. And I frequently put the business first. And I learned later that I wish I had made a different choice. Mm-hmm. I have a good relationship with both of my boys.
Yep, you do. Yep.
I believe I would have a very even much better if I had just been a little more present. So if I could do that over again, I'd do that over again. One thing, the other question was, what would I do consistently?
Yeah.
Meditate. Meditate. Meditation. So I've meditated off and on over the last several years, and it's one of the most important things. If you look at people who are successful, who are deemed successful by most normal measures of success, and you go through and read their biographies and listen to their stories, almost every single one of them talks about having a meditation and a gratitude process. That they meditate and they have a gratitude process and they journal. Those are the three things consistently that they do some form of. And I have found that in the times when I am doing those things, I am more productive, I'm happier, I'm more successful. And so that's what I would do on a consistent basis, is those three things: journal, meditate, and be grateful.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, thanks again for sharing your story and your valuable insight. And it's always good to see you, buddy.
You're welcome, man. Have a great rest of the year. And I know 2021 is going to be better for all of us.
All right. Thanks, buddy.
All right. I love you, John.